There comes a time in a man's life where you no longer want to throw your oats around in every which direction, instead want to invest in something a little more refined, a little bit more meaningful, where you want that one quality woman, that one quality relationship that will be with you for the rest of your life rather than chasing quantity. I've been with the mother of my kids now for almost 3 years, and it is a very different kind of relationship than any other one I've ever had. And I've realized I've done certain things differently to create this kind of relationship than when I was being driven by lust. In fact, many of these things I've only realized in retrospect are the exact opposite of what I did that allowed me to have success in lust-driven relationships. Because lust-driven dating and attracting that quality relationship are two different games. They have different rules, different strategies, and totally different payoffs. To be honest, I don't really love the word soulmate. Actually, it makes me cringe a little bit, and I definitely don't believe in the one. But what I do believe in is that the one woman you choose to commit to is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. Perhaps more important than the career you choose or where you choose to live. And progressing to that level of responsibility where you can attract that woman you really want to be with is part of the psychological journey of man. Because when it comes to sex, when it comes to lust, when it comes to women, there's basically 3 psychological stages a man goes through. There's what we could call the child stage, where lust is primarily expressed in fantasy. We call it child because it's like the underlying assumption is fulfillment with women is something other people do. Fulfillment with women is for the grown-ups, so to speak. And if you're an adult man, but your lust is primarily expressed in the cornfields, unfortunately, this is probably the stage you're in. The next stage is what we could call adolescence, where lust is your primary driver, which is fine, but commitment now is what seems far away. It seems like that's what the grown-ups do. And this is a totally fine stage of life. In fact, it pairs up, it should pair up evolutionarily with our biological puberty, our biological adolescence. Of course, nowadays in modern civilization, people grow up really late, so even a relatively mature 25-year-old guy probably is in this stage, and there's actually nothing wrong with that. But at some point, that gets old. At some point, a man's psyche wants to progress into the adult stage where, as far as biological strategy, the game isn't spreading your seed around as much as possible, but is instead investing in your progeny, where the drive to procreate is focused on what's important, your realm, so to speak, your kingdom, which is why we call this stage the king archetype. Now, whether a man wants to actually commit to a woman or not, of course, that's a choice. But to have that, if that is something you want, you have to be in that adult stage, or that quality woman won't even come near you. And if that's something you want, you have to learn how to navigate the land of women, your dating life, from a place other than lust. And the first thing you have to do is get out of statistical thinking. Some of the most common dating advice is that it's a numbers game, right? People say it's a numbers game because that takes away a lot of the emotional investment. It takes away the singularity. In fact, that advice, it's a numbers game, is a pretty good piece of advice. There's plenty of fish in the sea for someone who's really attached to one person that's not right for them or doesn't want them. That's fine. And if you're in that phase of life where you're just trying to get laid, it's actually an okay way to look at people, because that is how your lust works, right? Lust is totally indiscriminate. If you're a normal dude, then any or all women above a certain fitness threshold is probably enough to trigger your lust. In fact, there are plenty of things that are not even real women that will probably also trigger your lust. Pure lust views women as a statistic, whereas that quality woman, that woman you actually want to invest in, by definition is singular. By definition, at least, she's rare. And to attract that kind of woman, you actually have to switch out of statistical thinking. Jung actually warned people about statistical thinking just for their own individual process. One of his proteges, Marie-Louise von Franz, wrote, "To think of oneself in a statistical way is most destructive to the process of individuation because it makes everything relative. You do not realize what it does to you when you read statistics. It is completely destructive as a poison, and what is worse is that it is not true. It's a falsified image of reality. If we begin to think statistically, we begin to think against our own uniqueness. But it's not only thinking, but a way of feeling. In the statistical mood, one is overwhelmed by the manifoldness of ordinary life. This is wrong because statistics are built on probability, which is only one way of explaining reality. As we know, there's just as much uniqueness and irregularity." This is from the book, The Problem of the Puer Aeternus, which means infinite child. It's the Jungian archetype for the man who won't grow up. We nowadays call this Peter Pan syndrome, and a key feature of the Puriturnist is that he doesn't want to engage with real reality. He wants to hold on to all the fantasies, all the abstractions, rather than really getting into it. And one of the features is he can't ever really be with a woman because he's viewing them all statistically. He's viewing them all as abstractions, comparing them to idealizations rather than really engaging with a real woman. Because if you abstract people into statistics, then you're putting them in a category of like features and you're missing out on all their individual idiosyncrasies and individual qualities. Whereas that quality woman is necessarily unique. So some common advice I see, mainly from women to other women on Calling in the One, is to write a list of all the things you want in a partner. Write all the adjectives, all the qualities. It's a nice idea, but this is also statistical thinking. You're listing a set of abstractions and then comparing real people to this list. And if you know any woman who has a checklist or says something like, oh yeah, he checked all the boxes, very often you hear that it doesn't work. It doesn't work out because not only did she find out or he finds out that his predetermined list maybe is not what he's really looking for or she's looking for, there are probably tons of qualities and traits and idiosyncrasies in women that you would love that you would never think of beforehand. And if you view people statistically, if you're trying to compare people to your checklist, you're gonna miss them. So a much better idea than listing a bunch of adjectives is to decide on a specific function. What do you want this woman to bring in actuality to your life? What function do you want her to play in your life? How will your life be different with this person in your life? How will it be better? And I realize this functional approach maybe is a very unromantic way to look at relationships, but is much more concrete and less abstract than imagining some perfect person. What will she actually bring to your life? Do you want someone to be at your side as you conquer the world? Do you want someone who you never get bored talking to and knows everything about you? These are concrete things. For me personally, that specific thing was finding the mother of my children. I've always wanted kids, and if I was ever gonna invest my resources in a woman, commit to a woman, give up those other fun things, it was gonna be for that purpose, for raising children. And having this specific question in my mind, would she be a good mother of my children, made it a lot easier to assess women than a list of adjectives, because instead I could discover what adjectives I would like. There are tons of things about my wife that I love that make her a great mother to our daughter that I wouldn't have thought of beforehand. And this took me out of statistical thinking, whereas instead of measuring a woman's attributes or comparing her to others or comparing her to a checklist, I could actually view the real person in front of me and discover what was beautiful or not about them. Once you've decided on this specific function, the next thing is to be the complement of the thing that you want. So my wife and I actually met 4 years before we got together. I was traveling the world for the first time, I ran into her, and funny thing, we only interacted once. We literally had one moment of contact, we hugged. I specifically remember the sensation of her breasts against my chest. So it's not like there wasn't lust there, but that was literally our only point of contact ever. And we actually never even flirted. We exchanged Instagrams, we would message every so often about random platonic things. And it was funny because at this time in my life, at that point in my life, now 6 years ago, I was very lust-driven. If any woman who was attractive slid into my DMs, we were flirting, right? But for some reason, I just couldn't flirt with her. It just didn't, somehow it didn't progress. It was almost like, on some level, subconsciously, I felt she was too worthy of respect for me to flirt in the way that I knew how to flirt. It was only years later when I had changed my mode of behavior that we were actually able to connect. Because the thing is, and this is a law of human relating, is that when we connect with another person, especially intimately, we always complement each other's personality. This is an absolute law of intimacy. David Deida has said you always attract your sexual reciprocal. And he's mostly speaking about masculinity and femininity in that case. Like if a masculine dude ends up dating a masculine woman, one of them is going to become feminine. It is impossible they both stay in masculine mode and continue being together. And that's true when it comes to everything, even beyond polarity. Because how we act subconsciously informs people how to behave towards us, and if they're not down with that behavior, they won't even come near us. For instance, if you act like a pushover, people are going to push you over. If you act like prey, you're going to attract predators. A person who makes power plays on people all the time will only have people around him or her that accept that kind of behavior. In attachment theory, anxious behavior attracts avoidance. Avoidant behavior attracts anxious people. And not only the people, like calling a person anxious or avoidant is also an abstract way of looking at someone, but it also brings out that behavior in others. Right? Like a lot of red pill dating advice is basically acting avoidant to trigger anxiety in women and have them chase you. Because again, how we act informs people how to treat us. So when my wife and I met, she was committed to being committed. I was playing the lust game, so we just couldn't connect. We were not in the same reality. Only later, when I switched realities, basically to meet her in the commitment world, could we actually connect. So after you've decided that function, you want that quality woman to play in your life, you have to decide what is the complement to that? What matches that? Basically, who do you have to be to fit that kind of woman? What kind of behaviors complements those kinds of behaviors in her? What kind of function will I play in her life? Because only by behaving that way, only in being that way, will you meet and attract the person that fits that kind of behavior. Because if you don't do that, you're not leaving any room for such a person in your life. It's kind of like something we see a lot with very masculine women who want to be with a masculine man, but there's literally no space for such a guy in their life. It's the same thing, and I found this in myself in that before my wife and I really connected and got together, I was living a very bachelor life, right? If I wanted to leave room for the mother of my kids to nest inside of my perimeter, I had to build a better perimeter. I had to set my game up in a lot of ways. If I wanted someone to be with the kids, I had to be in a space where I was really providing for a family, not only financially, but spiritually and emotionally. Which brings us to our third principle, which is you have to cut off the other options. You can't play multiple games at once. Actually, around when I first met my wife, I was 28. I was first having the ideas of like, you know what? I really want a family. I do want to eventually meet the mother of my children, but I still want to do the hookup thing. And that's actually where I got in the most trouble in my relationships, because before then, I just wanted to play the lust game and things were fine. There were certain things that were getting old. You know, I think a lot of guys go through this phase. It's kind of a mark of your adolescent phase ending where personally I was thinking like, even though I was having fun, I was thinking, how many times am I going to tell the same stories? How many times am I going to let someone get to know me in the same way? I kind of just want someone who knows me already and we can build from there. But actually, that's okay. I do think that having experiences and finding fulfillment in your adolescent phase of life, however long it lasts, is important. But when I started playing both games at once was when I really started getting into trouble, because I was screening women based on lust, indiscriminately bringing women into my life. But because I wanted a relationship, I ended up in these weird relationships with women where it really didn't fit because I screened them based on one set of values and I was trying to get them to fill a function based on other sets of values. And I'll just leave it at, I ended up in some really weird relationships because I was trying to play two games at once that just didn't fit. They're mutually exclusive. So in the height of the pandemic, I had time to think, and I'd also had some weird pandemic relationships. And I was like, you know what? Something's not right with the way I'm relating to women. I need a reset. So I decided to be celibate for 6 months. I decided to really cut off lust, cold turkey for 6 months. Like I was exposing myself to nothing in that time period. And funny enough, this is the time where my wife and I basically reconnected. We were actually in different continents at the time. This is in the middle of lockdown. We were connecting over Zoom calls and WhatsApp voice notes. And it is the only relationship of my life that didn't start with lust, that didn't start with sex, right? We were actually getting to know each other without even physical contact. Like we would joke, like we haven't even smelled each other, we've never even kissed, but we're connecting so deeply. And I know on my side, I would have not had a room for that if I was letting lust continue to drive my life. If you're in child mode, you probably won't attract any women. If you're in adolescent mode, you'll probably only attract and connect with women who want that kind of non-committal thing, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. Because that quality woman that you actually want to invest in will only put up with or only be attracted to a guy who's willing to do that. Now, truthfully, for a lot of guys, this might mean having a certain number of experiences with women. It would be a terrible thing to find that awesome woman, be in that relationship, and then think, wow, I really didn't have enough experiences beforehand. But it's not about achieving a magical number, some statistic that you're chasing. And actually, the guys that I know that committed pretty young, entered that adult stage, didn't backslide into adolescence, they had certain things in common. They all happened to be from small towns Many of them were religious, and they all don't use social media. And I think this is a key thing, because what these three things had in common was that it made their world smaller. Their reference group was smaller. The people that they compare themselves to, the people and ideas and values that they measure themselves against was a much tighter, right? They weren't comparing themselves to the world feeling this infinite lack. Because if you don't mind a philosophical tangent for a second, modern globalist consumerist society is all about inducing artificial scarcity, right? For the first time in our lives, we are exposed to everyone in the world and everything and every possible experience. And the feeling of lack, the difference between what we think we can have and what we do have, is greater than ever before. And especially with women. For most of human history, if you were a typical guy, you might meet a couple hundred women in your entire life, if that. And now, of course, in a couple of minutes, you can scroll through hundreds of women or swipe through hundreds of women, and this induces artificial scarcity in our being. If you were a pre-civilization man, sure, you would chase various experiences in your psychological adolescence, which would line up with your physical adolescence, but at some point, your adult psyche would switch on. At some point, you'd meet a woman that really did it for you, and you would be thrilled because you wouldn't be thinking about another billion women that you could be with. You'd be like, this is where life starts. This is real life. Adolescence was fun, but real life starts now, where I'm taking care of what's actually important. The woman you commit to is as important as any decision you will ever make in your life. And attracting that woman is a totally different game than the lust-driven dating game. You have to stop thinking statistically. You have to be the man that complements that which you want, and you have to commit. You have to cut off everything else. You have to burn the boats and stop playing the lust game, and only then will you have space for that quality woman. And if you do that, you will attract your soulmate.